Hi, Phil Gould here. Love your rugby league? Then you'll want to hear my take on every round of NRL season in my podcast, Six Tackles with Gus. Get it every Wednesday afternoon, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to Bluebet, just search Six Tackles with Gus.
From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Salinger-Morris. It's Monday, June 19. Donald Trump has been indicted again. Last week, Donald Trump became the first former president to be charged with federal crimes. He was arraigned on 37 counts related to his handling of classified documents. The top secret documents, which include information about nuclear programs and military vulnerabilities, were found spread throughout his Mar-a-Lago club and residence. Some documents were stashed in a ballroom, an office, and even a bathroom. While the former president has pleaded not guilty to all charges, this past week remains one of the most damning of his political career. Today, U.S. correspondent Farrah Tomazin on the second indictment of Donald Trump, and whether the Republican presidential frontrunner could end up campaigning for his country's top job from jail. Farrah, for the second time in just 2 months, former President Donald Trump has been indicted, this time on federal criminal charges, and this indictment is over Trump's handling of classified documents. So can you start by going back to the basics with us? What exactly are these documents and why are they so important?
So I guess going back to basics, as we know, Trump held office from January 2017 to January 2021. During that time, he had access as the president to some of the most sensitive classified documents and national defense information that the US government owns. I'm talking info from key US agencies and departments like the CIA, the Department of Defense, the National Security Agency, and when he left the White House and Biden took over, he basically walked out with a whole bunch of material.
Former president, we are now learning, has pled not guilty on 37 counts involving allegations of mishandling classified documents of the highest national security order, Scott. So we'll wait to see the
information about, the weapons capabilities of the US and other foreign countries.
The president, we're talking about things at extraordinarily high levels of classification, and that.
He walked out with potential military vulnerabilities. He had intelligence that should have only been shared with members of the so-called Five Eyes allies, which basically includes Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and Canada.
A top secret document concerning the military capabilities of a foreign country and the United States. A top secret document concerning nuclear capabilities of a foreign country. Secret document concerning communications with a leader of a foreign country. A top secret document concerning...
And the reason these documents are so important is because the unauthorised disclosure of them could put the national security of the US and its foreign allies pretty much at risk. And, and it would also, I suppose, compromise the safety of the military and human sources, particularly if it fell into the wrong hands. So this is pretty serious and very unprecedented. Obviously, it's the first time a former US president has been charged federally by the government he used to oversee. And yeah, it was a great risk.
Okay, and to be clear, we're not just talking about a couple of pieces of paper, are we? I mean, how many documents were there? And where were they in his house? Because we were reading reports that they were stashed in some kind of unusual places.
Yeah, so to put this in context, they were found at Mar-a-Lago, which is essentially a big resort in West Palm Beach in Florida that Trump's owned since, I think, around 1985. Over the years, it's hosted hundreds of thousands of members and guests. I mean, everyone from Kanye West to Trump family members to politicians and the like. Trump basically had these boxes of documents everywhere. According to prosecutors, some of them were stashed in a ballroom, some of them were stashed in a bathroom and a shower, an office space, his bedroom, a storage room. I mean, that's pretty careless in terms of the classified material. And he took about, I think, more than 325 classified records, according to the indictment. And it wasn't just that he stored them carelessly. On a number of occasions, he allegedly shared some of the information with others as well. I mean, the indictment refers to the fact that there was this highly sensitive plan of attack against Iran that he allegedly shares with visitors in July of 2021. I think there was another incident in September 2021 where he shared top secret military maps with a staffer at one of his, fundraising committees who didn't have security clearance. So it wasn't just the taking of the documents and the carelessness in which he sort of had them thrown around Mar-a-Lago. It was also the sharing of them and the willful retention of them that has got him into a lot of trouble.
Okay, and that sort of brings me to my next question, because one thing I'm really curious about is something that, many of Trump's defenders have repeatedly pointed out, which is that other government officials, including President Joe Biden, Mike Pence, Hillary Clinton, they've also mishandled classified information without having been charged with crimes. Could you take us through how is Trump's case different to their cases?
Well, and you're right, this is something that Trump himself is constantly sort of bringing up. Hillary Clinton did indeed have her own classified document scandal. It stemmed from the use of her private email server to conduct government business while she was Secretary of State. Mike Pence, he also had classified materials that were found in his home in Indiana from his time as Trump's vice president. And in Biden's case, his personal lawyers, they found a bunch of classified documents from his time in the Obama administration stashed at a Washington-based think tank where he basically had an office after he finished being the vice president. I guess the difference, though, is these transgressions seemed to be accidental. They also returned the documents when they were asked. They didn't try to mislead federal investigators, although it should be noted that Biden still is under investigation for his supposed mishandling of classified documents. He's under another special counsel investigation through the DOJ. Mike Pence is in the all clear, but those were essentially the key differences.
Right, so we're really talking about sort of transgressions that seem to be accidental and that they had returned the documents when they'd asked, as opposed to Trump, who, it's been alleged, purposely misled federal investigators. Is that right?
That's absolutely right, and that's part of his problem. In March 2022, that's when the FBI opened a criminal investigation into the supposed unlawful retention of classified documents he had at Mar-a-Lago. A federal grand jury investigation then began the next month, and that grand jury essentially issued a subpoena basically saying, Trump, give us back the documents with all the classified markings. Instead of doing that, though, he tried to, and this is all in the indictment, tried to obstruct the FBI and the grand jury by a number of things. He tried to suggest that his attorney tell the FBI and grand jury that he didn't have the documents. He tried to direct his co-conspirator, Walt Nauta, an aide, to move boxes of the documents and conceal them from one of his attorneys, as well as the FBI and the grand jury. He suggested that his attorney hide or destroy documents called for by the grand jury. So he really, not just took the material and willfully retained it. He also tried to obstruct the investigations into it. This is essentially, the crazy thing about this is this whole thing is a mess of his own making. If he had just returned all the documents immediately, he wouldn't have been possibly charged with these offences, and we wouldn't have the situation we've got now.
Wow. It's astonishing. But what exactly are the charges then, and who is bringing them against Donald Trump?
Well, a special counsel was appointed by the Department of Justice, and his name is Jack Smith. He's essentially a former war crimes investigator, and he's running the case against Donald Trump. Trump now faces 37 separate charges, essentially. Most of those charges, I think 31 of them, involve violating a part of the Espionage Act that essentially bars willful retention, so keeping of national defence material without authorisation. And then he's got another sort of 6 charges, I think. 3 are relating to the withholding of concealed documents, 2 are relating to false statements, and 1 involves conspiracy to obstruct justice.
Okay, so let's return to Donald Trump and his response to all of this. Can you tell me a little bit about the atmosphere in court in Florida on Tuesday, and then what Donald Trump said later in the day when he gave a speech to his supporters outside of his golf club in New Jersey, where I understand he traveled after his court appearance. Apparently he unloaded on President Joe Biden, among other targets. Is that right?
Yeah, he did. The atmosphere outside the courthouse was pretty wild. So Trump was basically due to appear at around about 3 o'clock Florida time in the afternoon at the courthouse. Fans had essentially started gathering around about 8 a.m. These fans are from everywhere. There was, one Floridian who was draped in an American flag carrying a dead raw pig head on a stick.
Obvious reason, Osmani Estrada says he was inspired to bring a real pig's head on a stick.
From the Lord of the Flies. Today is a day for celebration. The democratic system in this country works.
I
There was another group known as Blacks for Trump who were basically there to cheer him on. They came out in force. There were a whole bunch of people from other states who just loved Donald Trump who came in.
And when Trump was in power, blacks and Latinos had good paying jobs and we were doing good. Biden came in, Obama came in.
Overall, it was a peaceful, I guess, demonstration. I mean, one person was arrested trying to jump on Trump's motorcade. I think that was an anti-Trump person. I mean, it wasn't violent. The concerns about extremism and all that sort of stuff didn't eventuate, which was good. It ended up being a pretty decent kind of protest atmosphere. In terms of Trump's response, the message was very much one of defiance. I mean, it was essentially, this is a witch hunt. This is all about election interference. They're coming after me, which means they're coming after you. He talked about political persecution by a two-tier justice system. And look, he also used it as a fundraising opportunity. I got some numbers from his campaign staff just earlier who claimed that over $4.5 million was raised in digital fundraising, along with $2.1 million since that Bedminster speech. So, it's an interesting kind of thing. The guy gets indicted on criminal charges and boom, his polls don't seem to sway, and he makes a hell of a lot of money out of fundraising. Incredible.
I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And so what has Trump's team said about how they're going to defend him now that he has pleaded not guilty? Do we know what they'll be arguing?
Well, I guess the broad strategy overall, not surprisingly, is just to derail the case. I mean, the clock is ticking, and his best hope is to push out this case, if he can, to the next election or beyond, because if he wins, then he can pardon himself, and if he doesn't, he'll hope that, someone might do it for him, for example, if a Republican ally gets into office instead. In terms of the legal strategy, essentially the argument will be, as he's indicated, that he had presidential authority to take these documents from the White House under the Presidential Records Act. He claims that, they were declassified because under that act, I'm the president and I have the authority. That's simply not true, though. I mean, the moment the president leaves office, all of the official records belonging to the federal government and the National Archives must be returned. So it's an interesting argument. They'll mount it. It's clear as part of their strategy, but whether or not it gets up is a different story.
And so what is the most likely outcome of this case? Could we actually see Donald Trump campaign from prison?
It's a very, very interesting question, and one that we've all sort of been pondering. Because the indictment is really quite detailed and devastating. I mean, it could very well result in a conviction. I mean, even Trump's own former Attorney General, Bill Barr, basically said, even if half of this indictment is true, he's toast, and that's his former Attorney General. The other thing it's probably worth noting is that only this month, the retired US Lieutenant Colonel by the name of Robert Burcham was essentially sentenced to 3 years jail in federal prison for basically storing files with classified information at his Florida home. He cooperated, he pleaded guilty, and he still got 3 years. So that doesn't really bode well for Donald Trump. An indictment and a conviction under the Constitution wouldn't bar Trump from being president. But the big question would be, let's just say, if he's in jail and then he gets elected president, what happens? That's essentially a constitutional crisis and would probably require him to be pardoned. But, it's all very up in the air. So there's a lot of hypotheticals. It's fair to say we're in pretty uncharted territory.
It's really sort of boggles the mind. And Farrah, finally, just how bad a look is all of this for Trump and his chances of getting up as president or even sort of becoming the Republican nominee? To some people, I imagine it looks like the most damning days of his career, something that it would be very hard to come back from. But I wonder if his supporters are perhaps looking at this differently, if it might even embolden them and reinvigorate their long-standing views of Donald Trump as the victim of a monumental witch hunt, by a weaponized Justice Department controlled by Joe Biden, which is certainly how Trump himself has put it.
It certainly emboldened his supporters. I've spoken to many of them out here in Miami, and they very much subscribe to the view that there is a two-tier justice system, that they're out to get Trump, that that Joe Biden is corrupt. But I guess these ongoing legal woes will no doubt be distracting for him. I mean, they'd force him to plan his campaign around his court appearances, not just the one here in Miami for the latest case, but also New York, where he faces trial over hush money charges paid to porn star Stormy Daniels. What's more, and I think this is the key part, these endless scandals could increasingly put off the moderates and the independents in the swing states that will determine the 2024 election. As a contact said to me just the other day, this guy makes Richard Nixon look like a Boy Scout. So in terms of what may happen, he may well get the Republican nomination. I'd probably at this stage even be willing to put money on it because he is so popular and so dominant in the polls. But I would find it very hard to see him going on to win the general presidential election.
Thank you, Farrah, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Margaret Gordon. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.
Hi, Phil Gould here. Love your rugby league? Then you'll want to hear my take on every round of NRL season in my podcast, 6 Tackles with Gus. Get it every Wednesday afternoon, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to Bluebet, just search 6 Tackles with Gus.